Picture a late 18th century vessel, its hull carving through the restless waves of the Atlantic. On its weathered deck stand young Marines, their posture unwavering against the ocean's sway. They are clad in sharp green uniforms, but it is the striking leather collar, gleaming in the sun, that commands attention. As the wind whips the flag overhead and saltwater crashes against the ship's timbers, seasoned sailors cast respectful glances toward these iron men. Their necks, protected and held ramrod straight by a band of stiff leather, seem a physical manifestation of their readiness to face any foe. This powerful image, forged in the age of sail, is more than just a historical snapshot. It is the genesis of a name that would echo through centuries, a name that would become synonymous with the very soul of the United States Marine Corps, Leatherneck. The term Leatherneck has long transcended the confines of simple military slang. It has evolved into a universal and deeply respected designation for a United States Marine, a title worn with immense pride and recognized globally. This is not a mere colloquialism whispered in barracks or shouted in the heat of battle. It is a fundamental piece of the American lexicon and a treasured part of its cultural heritage. The name's significance is so profound that it has been formally immortalized in the pages of the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, where Leatherneck is officially defined as a synonym for a member of the U.S. Marine Corps. This official recognition solidifies its place in the English language, cementing a legacy that began with a simple piece of uniform. The Marine Corps itself has wholeheartedly embraced the moniker, weaving it into its institutional identity. The most prominent example of this is Leatherneck — the official name of the monthly magazine published by the Marine Corps Association. By christening its flagship publication with this historic nickname, the Corps sends a clear message: the spirit of the original Leathernecks, their discipline, their toughness, their unyielding commitment, is the same spirit that defines the modern Marine. The magazine serves as a living chronicle of the Corps, connecting past and present generations under a single, powerful banner. Every issue reinforces the idea that to be a Marine is to be a part of an unbroken lineage of warriors, a brotherhood of Leathernecks. Perhaps the most remarkable testament to the name's cultural power lies far from the battlefield, on the athletic fields of a civilian university. In 1927, Western Illinois University sought a mascot that would embody the values of tenacity, courage, and unwavering spirit. They turned to the U.S. Navy and received special permission to adopt the Leathernecks as the official name for their sports teams. To this day, it remains the only non-military institution in the United States to be granted the honor of using such a distinctive and revered military nickname. This unique distinction highlights the profound respect the name commands across American society. The Western Illinois Leathernecks carry a legacy that extends beyond collegiate sports, symbolizing a connection to a warrior ethos that inspires and defines them. The name is not just a mascot, it is a standard of excellence they strive to uphold, a permanent tribute to the fighting spirit of the U.S. Marine. The story of the Leatherneck is therefore not merely about a piece of leather, it is the story of how a tangible object became an immortal symbol of honor, discipline, and the indomitable will of the United States Marine Corps itself. Long before the United States Marine Corps existed, the ancestor of its most famous symbol was already a fixture on the decks of British warships. The story of the Leatherneck does not begin with American revolutionaries but with the soldiers and Royal Marines of the British Empire, where the leather stock was born from a mixture of military tradition, brutal practicality, and a grim necessity for discipline. The roots of the moniker are firmly planted in the soil of 18th-century British military doctrine, where a simple piece of leather became an instrument of control and a shield against both the enemy's blade and a soldier's own weakness. As early as 1755, British soldiers were documented wearing stiff collars, or stocks, fashioned from leather or tightly woven horsehair as a standard part of their uniform. Following the conclusion of the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763, this element was officially integrated into the uniform of the esteemed British Royal Marines. This new, rigid leather stock served a practical purpose, replacing the purely decorative linen gorget that officers had traditionally worn. The shift was symbolic, moving away from aristocratic ornamentation toward a piece of equipment designed to enforce the rigid posture and unwavering alertness demanded of a professional fighting man. However, the stock's most peculiar and compelling function was not aesthetic but disciplinary. During the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763, the unforgiving reality of military life meant that falling asleep on sentry duty was a capital offense, punishable by execution. To combat the ever-present threat of exhaustion, officers developed a cruel but effective tool. Soldiers caught dozing were sometimes forced to wear punishing metal collars as a corrective measure. This practice soon evolved, and the stiff leather stock became a permanent, preventative feature of the uniform. Its primary purpose was to physically hold a Marine's head erect, making it painfully difficult, if not impossible, to nod off. The collar was an ever-present reminder of the deadly consequences of inattention. Its use was mandatory, and so integral was it to a Marine's duty that some men would even sew the stock directly into their uniform to ensure it was never lost or misplaced. Imagine the scene: the deck of a British line-of-battle ship in the 1770s. Young Marines stand watch in their crisp red uniforms, their gaze locked on the horizon by the unyielding grip of their leather collars. Their eyes grow heavy with the exhaustion of a long watch, but the stock digs mercilessly into their necks, preventing their heads from drooping. An officer makes his rounds, his sharp eyes scanning for any sign of slumber. For these sentries, the penalty for failure is absolute. In this harsh world, the leather collar serves a dual purpose: it is a shield not only against an enemy's saber but also against the hangman's noose. While the collar's role in enforcing discipline is well documented, an alternative and more colorful theory regarding the origin of the Leatherneck nickname exists. According to noted etymologists H. L. Mencken and William Morris, British sailors coined the term not because of the uniform, but as an insult directed at the Royal Marines' perceived lack of hygiene. The suggestion was that Marines, spending long months at sea, would only wash their faces, leaving their necks and the rest of their bodies unbathed. Over time, this neglect would supposedly cause the skin on their necks to become grimy, tough, and leathery. However, this theory, while intriguing, is viewed with considerable skepticism by modern historians, who find the direct link to the physical leather stock a far more plausible explanation. The British legacy, therefore, was a piece of equipment forged in the crucible of imperial warfare, a symbol of discipline that was about to cross the Atlantic and find its true destiny. The leather stock did not remain a purely British institution. As the flames of revolution ignited across the Atlantic, this emblem of military discipline was adopted by the nascent American fighting forces. In 1776, as the United States declared its independence, the Second Continental Congress authorized the formation of its own Marine Corps and mandated that the leather collar be worn by both officers and enlisted men. The Continental Marines, America's first sea soldiers, were a sight to behold in their distinctive uniforms: sharp green coats with white facings, practical buff-colored breeches, and black gaiters. And completing this martial image, worn with a mixture of pride and discomfort, was the mandatory leather stock. This act marked the official Americanization of the collar, transforming it from a symbol of the crown into an accessory for a new kind of warrior fighting for liberty. After the Revolutionary War, the Continental Marines were disbanded, but the need for a dedicated naval infantry force quickly became apparent once more. In 1798, the United States Congress passed an act that officially re-established the U.S. Marine Corps, and the leather stock was not merely remembered, it was codified as an essential piece of equipment. Official documents from that year laid out the uniform regulations with precision, stating that one black leather collar with a clasp was to be issued to every Marine annually. This was not a flimsy, decorative piece. The 1798 stock was a formidable item, a stiff, unyielding band of leather measuring between 2.5 and 3.5 inches in height. It was secured at the back of the neck with two buckles, ensuring a tight fit that enforced the rigid, head-up posture deemed essential for a Marine. The experience of wearing the stock was a defining aspect of daily life for these early American Marines. Its sheer inconvenience was legendary. The collar was so notoriously uncomfortable and difficult to keep properly adjusted that some Marines took matters into their own hands, permanently sewing the stock to their uniform tunics. This act of crude modification guaranteed that the collar would always be in its correct, regulation position, saving the wearer from the wrath of his superiors while simultaneously binding him to its rigid posture. This small detail speaks volumes about the stock's dual nature. It was a respected symbol of the Corps but a constant source of physical torment for the individual. Beyond enforcing posture and discipline, an alternative theory for the stock's continued use in the American military emerged, one rooted in combat effectiveness. According to historical documents preserved in the Marine Corps Museum, the collar was believed to serve a vital function in marksmanship. By holding the Marine's head and neck in a fixed, immobile position, the stock allegedly prevented involuntary movements while aiming a rifle. In this view, the uncomfortable device became a tool for improving accuracy, turning a disciplinary measure into a tactical advantage. Whether this was its primary intent or a beneficial side effect, the theory lent a practical, martial justification to its presence, framing the stock as an aid to lethality. Envision the port city of Philadelphia in 1798. The newly reformed United States Marine Corps is proudly donning its first official uniform. These young Americans, many of them veterans who still carry the memories of the war for independence, stand tall in their new tunics, the black leather collars cinched tightly around their necks. There is a palpable sense of a new beginning. This is not the British Army of their former colonial masters, this is the embodiment of a new American spirit, clad in leather and iron, ready to defend a new nation on the high seas and foreign shores. To truly comprehend the Leatherneck moniker, one must first dissect the object that inspired it. The leather stock, or collar, was far more than a simple accessory, it was a carefully constructed piece of equipment designed to physically mold a Marine's posture and, by extension, his military bearing. Its anatomy reveals a design that prioritized discipline and uniformity above all else, including the wearer's comfort. Understanding this object, how it felt, how it functioned, and the unyielding demands it placed upon the men, is essential to grasping the legend it created. The stock was a formidable band of rigid leather, meticulously crafted to encircle the neck. Its construction was specific and unforgiving. Fastened at the nape of the neck by two prominent brass or copper buckles, it could be cinched to an uncomfortably tight fit. The collar's height was its most defining feature, measuring between 2.5 and 3.5 inches at the front, a significant vertical span that covered the throat and propped up the chin. From this high point, the leather was expertly cut to taper toward the back, allowing for a secure fit around the neck circumference. The material itself was a black, glazed leather, polished to a lustrous finish that caught the light, making it a conspicuous part of the uniform. The physical experience of wearing the stock was immediate and profound. Its sheer rigidity was its primary characteristic, it was so stiff that it literally locked the wearer's head into a fixed, vertical position. Even the slightest sideways glance or downward tilt of the head was severely restricted, if not made impossible. For the Marine, this meant his gaze was perpetually forced forward, his chin held high in a state of constant, manufactured alertness. As a standard-issue item, every enlisted Marine received one new stock annually as an integral part of his uniform allowance, a yearly reminder of the unyielding posture the Corps demanded. This was not an optional piece of formal wear. The leather stock was a mandatory component of the uniform under all conditions, and the regulations surrounding it were absolute. It was worn during grueling combat operations and on the polished floors of the parade ground with equal obligation. There was no reprieve from its grip. A Marine who failed to wear his stock faced certain punishment, as its absence was considered a serious breach of military discipline. This constant, enforced presence transformed the collar from a mere article of clothing into a symbol of the Marine's total commitment to the Corps' standards. Paradoxically, the stock's impact on a Marine's combat effectiveness was a subject of debate. Its extreme discomfort could be a liability, hindering a man's ability to aim properly if he needed to look down his sights at a sharp angle. Yet, a counterargument, seemingly born from the same rigidity, claimed it actually improved marksmanship. By forcing the head and neck to remain perfectly still, the stock created a stable platform for the shooter, eliminating involuntary twitches and theoretically leading to a steadier, more accurate shot. This dual nature, a hindrance and a help, only adds to the mystique of the object. Imagine a young Marine in the quiet of his barracks, fastening the stock for the first time. The initial moment of freedom is shattered by the first click of a buckle, as the cold, stiff leather constricts around his neck. With the second buckle secured, a feeling of complete immobility sets in. He is compelled to lift his head higher than he ever has before, his eyes now fixed on the path directly ahead. The leather band is a constant, tangible pressure. Yet, in the culture of the Corps, this was not a ring of slavery, it was a ring of honor. The leather stock was a symbol of discipline and a tool for posture, but it was in the crucible of North Africa that it was forged into a legend. The First Barbary War, 1801 to 1805, was the U.S. Marine Corps' first major overseas conflict, a defining series of engagements where the young service earned its formidable reputation and where the Leatherneck nickname was baptized in blood. It was here, on the shores of Tripoli, that the practical function of the collar, real or imagined, became inextricably linked with Marine heroism. The conflict began in 1801 when President Thomas Jefferson, refusing to pay the exorbitant tributes demanded by the Barbary States, ordered the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps to assert American control over the Mediterranean. For years, pirates from Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli had preyed on American merchant ships, plundering cargo and capturing crews for ransom. The breaking point came in May 1801, when Yusuf Karamanli, the Pasha of Tripoli, declared war by having his men chop down the flagpole in front of the American consulate. The situation escalated dramatically in 1803 when the frigate USS Philadelphia ran aground near Tripoli harbor during a storm and was captured, its entire crew taken prisoner. The stage was set for a decisive American response. That response culminated in the Battle of Derna, one of the most audacious and celebrated operations in Marine Corps history. The mission was led by Lieutenant Presley O'Bannon, who commanded a small, motley force on a seemingly impossible quest. His contingent consisted of just 8 U.S. Marines, supported by a mixed army of 38 Greek mercenaries, 25 European cannoneers, and a larger contingent of local allies led by the Pasha's exiled brother, Hamid Karamanli. To reach their objective, this unlikely army undertook a grueling 500-mile march across the unforgiving North African desert. A 6-week ordeal marked by mutinies, starvation, thirst, and simmering religious tensions. They arrived at the fortified city of Derna on April 25, 1805. The American commander, General William Eaton, sent a letter demanding surrender. The defiant reply from Derna's governor, Mustafa Bey, was allegedly simple and stark: "My head or yours." The assault began on April 27. While 3 U.S. warships, the USS Nautilus, USS Hornet, and USS Argus, pounded the city's defenses from the sea, O'Bannon and his men advanced on the fortress under heavy enemy fire. After 45 minutes of relentless naval bombardment, the enemy's artillery was silenced. 2.5 hours after the attack began, Derna had fallen. The victory was stunning and decisive, achieved with minimal American losses, 2 killed and 3 wounded. It was during the brutal, close-quarters fighting of the Barbary Wars that the legend of the leather stock was born. According to revered Marine Corps lore and naval history, the high, stiff collars proved to be a surprisingly effective piece of personal armor. Barbary pirates, who favored scimitars and curved swords, found their slashing attacks against a marine's neck were often deflected by the tough band of leather. This protective function, demonstrated repeatedly in the chaos of boarding actions and land battles like Derna, cemented the collar's value in the minds of the men who wore it. The stock was no longer just a piece of uniform, it was a lifesaver. This belief solidified the reputation of the Marines as Leathernecks and forever linked the nickname to their battlefield prowess. Yet, a historical paradox exists. Modern historians from the Marine Corps Museum and its archives now suggest that the stock was likely of little practical use as armor against a determined sword strike. It is more probable, they argue, that the collar was simply a distinctive piece of the uniform worn during the Marines' first heroic chapter, and its legend grew in the telling. In the collective memory of the nation and the Corps, this piece of leather became a battle talisman. But whether the protection it offered was real or merely perceived, the connection was made. For the American imagination and for the Marines themselves, the link between the leather collar and the heroism displayed at Derna became absolute and unbreakable. Picture the scene: the scorching desert sun beats down on the small, exhausted force as it advances on the fortress of Derna. Ahead lies a fortified enemy, 100 strong. Lieutenant O'Bannon raises his sword. Around him, the Marines instinctively touch their leather collars, as if drawing strength from a sacred amulet. Dust kicks up from enemy bullets landing at their feet. They press forward, the leather on their necks protecting them not from steel, but from fear. 2 hours later, for the first time in history, the American flag is raised over a foreign fortress, hoisted by a U.S. Marine, Presley O'Bannon. The legend was now complete. As the United States plunged into the cataclysm of its Civil War, 1861 to 1865, and emerged into the Victorian era, the leather stock remained an unyielding fixture of the Marine Corps uniform. While tactics, weaponry, and the very fabric of the nation were transformed by conflict, the collar endured as a symbol of continuity and tradition. It had survived multiple official uniform redesigns, in 1833, 1839, and again in 1859, each time being reaffirmed as an essential element of a Marine's appearance. By this point, the stock was no longer a novelty, it was an institution. Having been worn for over 70 years, its presence had allowed the Leatherneck nickname to become deeply rooted not only within the martial brotherhood of the Corps but also in the American public's perception of its sea soldiers. The physical object was steadily transforming into an idea. One of the most vivid and enduring descriptions of the stock's effect comes from this period, recorded in the memoirs of General George Fanning Elliott. Looking back on his service after the Civil War, Elliott recalled the profound impact the collar had on a Marine's posture with a touch of wry humor. The effect of the stock, when buckled around the neck, he wrote, was to hold the head high in the air, like geese looking for rain. Though seemingly ironic, this description perfectly captured the stiff, almost unnatural bearing the device imposed upon its wearer. Elliott's memorable simile became one of the most powerful literary testaments to the stock's influence, immortalizing the image of the ramrod-straight, skyward-gazing Marine for future generations. The collar's distinctive and uncomfortable nature made Marines an easy target for inter-service rivalry. Sailors, who enjoyed more practical and less restrictive clothing, often mocked the Marines for their rigid posture and the conspicuous leather bands that enforced it. Yet, this ridicule did little to diminish the Marines' attachment to the stock. Instead, they wore it with a defiant pride, embracing it as a visible marker of their unique identity and superior discipline. On the parade ground, this effect was undeniable. The stocks gave the Marines a look of absolute uniformity and an unwavering, statuesque bearing that set them apart from all other military units. Their heads held high and their movements precise, they looked every bit the elite fighting force they aspired to be. It was also likely during this era of formal discipline and burgeoning rifle technology that the theory of the stock as a marksmanship aid gained wider acceptance. With the head held in a perfectly immobile position by the collar's grip, a Marine could, in theory, achieve a more stable sight picture. The very thing that made the stock a nuisance in daily life became a purported advantage in combat. This practical justification, whether rooted in fact or folklore, added another layer to the stock's growing legend, framing it as not just a symbol of discipline, but a tool for lethal efficiency. Picture a Marine barracks in 1864, in the midst of the Civil War. Weary Marines, caked in the mud and grime of the battlefield, return from a campaign. Their uniforms are tattered, their faces etched with exhaustion, but one detail remains constant: the black leather stock is still buckled firmly around each man's neck. Despite the chaos of war and the agony of personal hardship, this symbol of their code remains perfectly in place. A young officer watches them, a sense of awe overriding his fatigue. He later opens his journal and writes a simple, powerful observation: even in hell, they remain gentlemen of war. Every tangible object has a finite lifespan, and so it was for the leather stock. In 1872, after nearly a century of service as a defining feature of the United States Marine, the stock was officially removed from the uniform regulations. The era of the physical collar had come to an end. But while the object itself was retired, its spirit had already achieved a form of immortality. By 1872, the nickname it had inspired, Leatherneck, was no longer a piece of simple slang tied to an article of clothing. It had become a title of honor, a name so deeply woven into the fabric of the Marine Corps' culture and identity that its survival was never in question. This created a unique historical paradox, one of the most compelling in American military history. The Marines had discarded the physical object, but they refused to relinquish the name. This is the only known instance where a nickname, born from a specific piece of equipment, has not only survived the obsolescence of its namesake but has grown stronger in its absence. Some historians have referred to this phenomenon as a form of linguistic immortality, where the word becomes more powerful and more real than the thing it once described. The Corps consciously chose to preserve the idea of the Leatherneck even as it unbuckled the last leather stock. As a permanent tribute to this legacy, a subtle but significant detail was incorporated into the modern Marine Corps dress blues uniform. A high, stiff collar remains a feature of the tunic, but sewn onto its inside is a thin strip of black, glossy leather. This small, symbolic band serves as a direct and permanent homage to the era of the stock, a quiet reminder for every Marine of the unyielding discipline and heritage that the original collar represented. The removal of the stock in 1872 was not an abrupt decision but the final step in a gradual evolution. Over the years leading up to its discontinuation, the stock had been made progressively softer and more pliable, slowly transforming from a rigid instrument of posture into a more symbolic accessory. This process eased its eventual departure from the uniform, but it also cemented its legendary status in the memories of the men who had worn it at its most unforgiving. Interestingly, the British Royal Marines also phased out their leather stocks around the same period. However, their legacy took a different path, as they acquired another, though debated, nickname, boot neck, supposedly because they crafted replacement collars from the tough leather cut from the tops of their boots. This transition from a physical object to an intangible ideal is best captured in a scene that has become part of the Corps' folklore. Imagine a barracks in 1872. A young Marine is issued his new uniform, the first he has received without the familiar leather collar. He runs his hand over the empty space on his neck, a look of confusion and perhaps disappointment on his face. He feels that something essential is missing. An old, grizzled sergeant, who has worn the stock through decades of service, sees the young man's expression. He walks over and places a hand on his shoulder. "Boy," the sergeant says, his voice low and steady, "the collar may leave our decks, but it will never leave our honor. From now on, we wear it in our souls." While the leather stock was a physical reality for Marines for nearly a century, the exact moment its name was transferred to the men who wore it is a more elusive piece of history. The etymology of Leatherneck is a fascinating study in military slang, filled with competing theories, debated timelines, and a gradual evolution from a descriptive term to a legendary title. Pinpointing its precise origin requires navigating through a fog of naval folklore and sparse historical records. The documentary evidence reveals a timeline that is more recent than many might assume. The earliest known recorded use of the word Leatherneck in specific reference to American Marines dates to 1907. Across the Atlantic, the first undisputed mention of British Royal Marines as Leathernecks appears in the historical record between 1889 and 1890. There is, however, a much earlier British reference from 1823 that describes U.S. Marines and their distinctive leather neckcloths, but this is a description of the uniform item, not a documented use of the nickname for the men themselves. This timeline is a point of contention among historians and etymologists. The renowned lexicographers H. L. Mencken and William Morris proposed a theory that the term originated with the British Royal Navy and was only adopted into the American lexicon during World War I. However, given the earlier documented uses, this late date is viewed with significant skepticism by modern military historians, who argue the name was already well established in the U.S. by the turn of the 20th century. The debate over its birthplace remains active. One school of thought insists the name was born within the British Royal Marines and was simply inherited by their American counterparts. Another compelling theory suggests the name arose organically among American sailors, who used Leatherneck as a term of mockery for the Marines and their comically rigid posture, enforced by the stiff collars. The modern consensus, however, leans toward a more nuanced conclusion: the term may well have appeared independently in both navies as a logical descriptor. What is clear is that by the end of the 19th century, Leatherneck was firmly cemented in American slang as the definitive moniker for a U.S. Marine. Beyond the obvious connection to the collar, several alternative theories for the name's origin persist. One popular version suggests it refers to the sun-scorched skin of Marines who spent countless hours on the exposed decks of sailing ships, causing their necks to become dark, tough, and leathery. Another, less flattering theory, championed by Mencken, points to poor personal hygiene at sea, claiming that Marines would often wash only their faces, leaving their necks grimy and discolored. Interestingly, a parallel usage of the word has been found in 1890s Australia, where Leatherneck was a term used to describe a sheep station worker whose neck was permanently tanned and weathered by the harsh sun. Ultimately, the power of the name lies less in its exact origin and more in what it came to represent. A scene from 1907 perfectly captures this transformation. A journalist sits with a battle-hardened Marine, a man approaching 40 with a lifetime of service in his eyes. The journalist asks him about the nickname. The Marine smiles a knowing, weary smile. "We, Leathernecks," he muses. "Maybe so. But it's a name they gave us with respect. For what we survived, for how we fought, for the fact that we never retreated. The leather stock itself may be a relic of a bygone era, but the name it inspired has not only survived but flourished, embedding itself deeply into the culture of the Marine Corps and the broader American identity." The endurance of Leatherneck is a powerful testament to how a simple nickname can evolve into a profound symbol of institutional values. Its legacy lives on not in museums, but in the language, traditions, and very soul of the modern Corps. The term has achieved a level of official recognition that elevates it far beyond mere slang. Leatherneck is now formally included in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, where it is defined as a synonym for a member of the United States Marine Corps. This linguistic validation cements its status as a legitimate part of the American language, a word that carries the full weight of the history and honor of the institution it describes. The Marine Corps itself has proudly claimed the name. Leatherneck is the official title of the esteemed monthly magazine of the Marine Corps Association. Founded in 1930, the magazine serves as a chronicle of the Corps, and its title acts as a constant, living link to the service's storied past, connecting every reader to the lineage of the original sea soldiers. Perhaps the most striking example of the name's cultural reach is found at Western Illinois University. In 1927, the university was granted the unique privilege of adopting Leathernecks as the official name for its sports teams. It remains the only civilian institution in the United States to use a military nickname borrowed directly from the Marine Corps, a distinction granted with the full permission of the U.S. Navy. This honor reflects a deep, nationwide respect for the title and the warrior ethos it represents. The name serves as a perpetual tribute, holding the university's athletes to a standard of toughness and resilience embodied by the Marines themselves. The legacy of the stock is also visibly honored in the modern Marine uniform. The high, stiff collar of the contemporary dress blues tunic is a direct and intentional design element meant to evoke the historical leather stock. It serves as a physical reminder for every Marine of the discipline and unwavering bearing that have defined the Corps for over 2 centuries. This sartorial homage ensures that the spirit of the original Leatherneck is present every time a Marine dons their most iconic uniform. Ultimately, the nickname has survived because of the powerful symbolism it accrued over time. Leatherneck has become a shorthand for the core values of the Marine Corps: unyielding discipline, a deep respect for tradition, and an indomitable fighting spirit. It represents the unbreakable bond between past and present generations of Marines, allowing a 21st-century warrior to share a title with the heroes who fought at Derna. The name's evolution from a potential insult, hurled by sailors, into a revered military honor is a story of transformation. It has joined other celebrated monikers like Devil Dogs, a title born from the respect of their German adversaries in World War I who called them Teufelhunden, and Jarhead, a nickname coined by American sailors during World War II, as a term of endearment and pride. Modern Marines embrace the word Leatherneck not as an insult, but as a cherished piece of their military heritage. Envision the 21st century. A young Marine, clad in his immaculate dress blues, stands before a monument dedicated to the heroes of the Barbary Wars. His uniform is modern, his weapon is state-of-the-art, but the collar on his tunic remains high, stiff, and black. He instinctively reaches up and touches it, a silent acknowledgement of the history he carries. In that moment, he is connected to every Marine who came before him. He whispers the words, a statement of identity that transcends time: I am a Leatherneck. The story of the Leatherneck is, in the end, a story of transformation. It begins with a tangible object, a stiff, uncomfortable, and unyielding band of black leather, and ends with an immortal idea. The nickname, born from a physical piece of a uniform, has outlasted that object by a century and a half, demonstrating the remarkable power of military culture to forge symbols that become more potent and enduring than the material from which they were made. The leather stock is gone, but the Leatherneck remains. This journey from a piece of equipment to a legendary title shows how military history becomes woven into the fabric of a national legend. The name connects a direct, unbroken line from the shores of Tripoli in the Barbary Wars of 1801 to the global battlefields of the 21st century. It is a living symbol of the American Marine Corps, a single word that encapsulates over 200 years of discipline, sacrifice, and fighting spirit. It stands as a powerful example of how history is not merely recorded but is carried forward, passed from one generation to the next, not in textbooks, but in the names they proudly call themselves. The final and most profound paradox is this: the physical leather collar was officially retired in 1872, but it was only then that the word Leatherneck began to acquire its true power and grandeur. Freed from its physical constraints, the name evolved into something far greater, an embodiment of an ethos. Today, a young Marine who has never seen or touched an authentic 18th century stock will stand tall and declare with immense pride, "I am a Leatherneck." The name requires no physical anchor, its meaning is carried in the honor of the Corps itself. Picture a final, timeless scene. The sun sets over the vast expanse of the Atlantic as a modern U.S. Navy warship cuts through the waves. On its deck stand Marines of the current era. They are armed with the latest technology and trained in tactics their forebears could never have imagined. Yet, they are bound to the past by the same title that their brothers in arms carried 220 years ago. The history is not forgotten. It lives in the name. It lives in the word, Leatherneck.